What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Carpenter and the Professor. I'm Noah Karchivik, and with me, as always, is Carlos El Garrido. Tonight, we have an awesome show lined up for y'all. We're going to be talking about Javier Milei in Argentina, basically abandoning any semblance of motion towards BRICS. We're going to be and all the protests that are erupting there. We're going to be talking about the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. We're going to be hearing from the mother of a dead Palestinian girl speaking out, saying that Israel is only good at bombing innocent civilians and children, which is absolutely true. We're going to take a good look at where the U.S. is going into 2024, how there's debtors not paying student loans, how bourgeois democracy is falling apart, all kinds of stuff. We're also going to go over to China for a little bit and show people that despite what they may hear, people do speak their minds in China. They do have protests, and they're not all being hushed up and arrested or shot or whatever else the ridiculous mainstream media would have you think. And we're going to do all of that right after the international.
All right, and we're back. It's great to be with you all, my dearest comrades. It's been around a 1 week hiatus where we've been celebrating the holidays. For those that celebrate Christmas, I know that at least in the U.S. it's around 90-something% of the people, a good portion of which are not themselves Christians. But Noah, how are you doing? Is there anything you've been reading throughout the holidays?
Reading throughout the holidays, yes. I've been doing a bit of reading. For anyone who doesn't know, my mom is currently not doing well. So we had a sort of truncated Christmas celebration, which is unusual in the Karchivik family. So I've been, here we go. Let's grab this if I can get out from under that. I've been going over The Management of Savagery by Max Blumenthal, which is a fantastic book, by the way. Eddie's been reading that recently too, I believe. I've also been continuing Francis Stoner Saunders' book, The Cultural Cold War. Yeah, that's about it for me, though. How about you, brother? What have you been reading?
Oh man, I've been literally all over the place with the reading. Around 7 different things, 7-8 different things each day. Some of the more consistent, bigger book readings have been Elena Sheehan's Until We Fall, which is a continuation of her last book, which was on the first half or so of her life. This one kicks off right when socialism in Eastern Europe begins to fall apart, and the first few chapters are very hard. You know, it tells us of an era that I myself wasn't able to experience. I've been kind of lucky to have been born into an era where just being optimistic about socialism was there from the beginning of my political life. And you go back and you read how difficult it was for communists in the late 80s and early 90s, and you know how hard it was to, like her, not lose hope in the project of socialism and communism. and it's a completely different picture to the one that I'm used to as someone who's been politically active for a little bit over a decade now. But I've been reading her book. I've been reading a few one book on Stalin that one of our followers, Institute viewers, sent to us. It's from a Chinese scholar, and it goes through the 4 eras of Stalin's key works and productions, and the development of Stalin's ideas around the question of socialism. I've also been reading a bunch of other random philosophy stuff, and a lot about Palestine. I've been reading Leila Khalid's biography, and yeah, just a whole different wide array of assortments of scholarly essays and news and various different books that I pick up and put down after a couple of chapters. Oh, Ellen Meiken's Woods, The Origins of Capitalism. I've been digging into that one quite a bit, and was able to get through Parenti's Super Patriotism, which I haven't read in maybe 3 to 4 years, and it's such an incredible book. So many of the problems we have in the modern left would be avoided if people actually read that book. But yeah, so
I love Parenti because he gives you the Marxist view of things without all the jargon, without all the references that we're used to, and all of the, I don't know, to me it just like does it distracts from the point being made, right? You can just come from the Marxist perspective on your own and never need to mention any of that. And that's what Parenti does in Super Patriotism. He does basically the same thing Lenin does in a really famous essay that he writes on the subject called On the Pride of the Great Russians, or On the National Pride of the Great Russians, or something like that, where he talks about how the bourgeois version of patriotism, after you get into this bourgeois epic, is specifically anti-patriotic, and it has to be based on the material nature of what a bourgeoisie is, right? He calls it a quasi-patriotism, and says that the only real patriotism is with the communists, right? He says that they love their language and their country, and for them it's a shame to be experiencing czarist absolutism and bourgeois decay, right? So it's a good book, honestly. Everything he does is great, though. I
this is the name of the one on Stalin, by the way.
Oh,
It's from like 2007, 2008. Gu Hailiang, new research on. Oh my God, I misspelled research pretty badly. On Stalin's socialist thought. So if anyone wants to check that out,
I'm gonna have to check that one out. I remember it being mentioned. I just haven't gotten to it. A lot of stuff.
It's pretty good. The translation's not the best, but the substance of it is pretty interesting. It's good to see the systematization of Stalin's life's work into various epochs, and to read through the transitions going on in his work at a more theoretical, concrete, abstract form.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I've been able to do with Lenin, but I haven't had a chance to do it with Stalin. I've just read Stalin, not sat down and had that systematic, more comprehensive approach to his life's work that this book introduces.
Yeah, I have his collected works. He is underrated as a thinker. Absolutely. He always called himself nothing more than a student of Lenin, right? But that's just not the case. He was innovative and creative, and while he wasn't there in a period that needed an update of Marxism or a new particular form or anything like that, like we happen to be in the US right now, he was a very sharp Marxist-Leninist in his own right. And I think it really comes out in his criticisms of the same problems we go through with supposed Marxists right now, right? His whole economic problems of socialism in the USSR is on dogmatic thinkers approaching the problem of how to build socialism and getting their Marxism wrong, right? And basically the whole thing is Stalin holding them to the correct Marxism and explaining why you can't, for instance, abolish commodity production or the law of value through force of will, that it doesn't work like that, right? Yeah, I think he's great. I want to address one more. So there's some talk in the chat that I look sharp, which thank you, although you don't need to lie. I'm dressed up because I was just doing an interview with RT, actually, on one of the topics we're going to be going over tonight, Javier Milei and the recent letters that they sent to BRICS, and officially saying they're turning away from BRICS. So honestly, I'd love to just go dive right into that if you're good with that, brother.
Yeah, let's do that. I think I can pull up one of the things that has been going on over the last couple of days. This is an article from People's Dispatch that discusses the various trade unions and social movements that have mobilized more than 7,000 workers and other pro-people coalitions against the government of Milei. And I mean, some of the images and videos that we're getting of people protesting outside major government buildings are just incredible. Streets so packed that you can't see the floor, and packed as far as you can capture the horizon with the camera. So you have various trade unions, the General Confederation of Labor, Workers Central Union of Argentina, and the Association of State Workers, Frente Patria Grande, and other major left movements and parties. And it's a very interesting development because, as we've been breaking down from the start of Milei's election, one of the central crises that Argentina has been in for decades because of the neoliberal model imposed on them has been the fact that there's completely no left in Argentina. It's really just the neoliberal quote-unquote center. And now you have a figure like Milei, who presents himself in a very clownish manner, but as an alternative. And the people were faced with either more of the same, which is destroying their lives, or this guy, which presents himself as at least giving some form of a half-assed critique of the existing order. And we know that he's not actually radical. That is, he's not going to the roots of what the problem is, the capitalist imperialist system, and how Argentina functions as an imperialized country. He's not going to those roots and changing it. On the contrary, he's just speeding up the process of neoliberalization that's already been in place and that has destroyed the people of Argentina's lives. He's accelerating the process of austerity for working people, deregulation, liberalization of the economy, and privatization. That's the essence of neoliberalism. So he's as in tune with the crisis that he claims to be a response to. But for regular Argentinian people, there is no strong communist party. There is no strong progressive socialist people's party that they can turn to. So it's a very interesting situation. I think that there are some places in the world where we can say, as Dr. Montero has done, that the new world is dying and the new one is being born, that sort of inversion of Gramsci. But there's some places like Argentina where the new world is, the world is dying, the old world is dying, but there doesn't seem to be at least the organizations necessary to bring the new world into existence. But no, you've been following this a lot more closer than I have. So can you give the folks some of your thoughts?
Yeah, one of the main issues here, right, is that the claims, I mean, this guy is an anarchist, right? He's individually oriented, everything, society doesn't exist. Every dogmatic assertion they make, he's making. But what's really scaring people is he talked this game of decentralization and the over bureaucratization of the Argentinian government, right? And how it's preventing the economy from thriving. And he just guesses this based on his dogmas, right? He doesn't ever look at what's actually happening. What are the causes and effects, right? And so his decentralization and deregulation amounts to a centralization of power, right? Destroying all of these ministries and folding the powers into one office, which is nothing other than a centralization of power. And that's worrying people because what it's doing is getting everything out of the way of basically the compradors who got them in trouble with the IMF in the first place. All of the regulations they had to put up to sort of slow their roll are being removed. So he's not, his issue isn't, okay, our people are being impoverished, our currency is being devalued. What's causing this, and how do we fix that? His issue is free market good. We must do all free market, right? And let's be real, free markets don't exist. If they ever existed, they don't exist in 2023. What he's doing is tying the entire Argentinian livelihood of the people to a decaying American dollar and Federal Reserve system. His move away from BRICS, honestly, I was saying this to RT earlier. It's one of the worst moves they possibly could have made. And it doesn't seem motivated by any real analysis of the Argentinian situation, like economically speaking, right? Or in an understanding of current world markets or currency exchanges, right? Which is desperately needed in Argentina, which has been experiencing radical inflation and black market currency exchanges, all kinds of problems. It's wholly based on a childish adherence to ideology. He genuinely believes this, that something called this free market is embodied in our Western economy, right? And he's hell-bent on dragging Argentina into the dumpster fire that is the US dollar, the Federal Reserve, and the decaying unipolar world order. The way I put it to RT was that he's picked a horse based on blind faith, and it's a losing horse.
No, it absolutely is, and that's the interesting thing, that Milei is presenting himself as the agent of the new world for the Argentinians that have been able to buy into it. But the paradox is that he's the one that's going back to the old order as deeply as possible, and it's an order that's collapsing. It's basically a corpse at this point, and everyone is starting to smell it. But one of the things that has developed in the last week or so, since the inception of his presidency, is that Milei is now allowing employers to pay their workers in either cryptocurrencies, to kilos of meat and liters of milk. So this is the essence of neoliberalism. It takes the Keynesian welfare state that, to a certain extent, helped capitalism stabilize in the beginning to the middle of the 20th century, and it just deregulates everything. It deregulates, it provides austerity, so less for the people, more for the rich, less regulations that the rich have to follow, more privatization, so more property in the hands of the big monopoly capitalist class, more and more organized in global terms. And there's no semblance of this order benefiting the rich, to the point where now, once again, and as has been done a few times in the past, in 2008 and in the 80s, there's major newspapers like The Guardian, or even Biden declaring that neoliberalism is dead. And that's not true at all. We're seeing neoliberalism as a natural extension of the capitalist system in its most moribund moments. It's still well and alive, and it literally cannot die except with the death of the capitalist imperialist system that it was designed to give some breathing room to after the horrific crisis of the 1970s. And if anyone's looking for some really good scholarly work on this, please do check out the work of Radhika Desai, specifically in Capitalism, Coronavirus, and War. She details how, with the crisis of the 1970s, capital had two options for reinvestment of capital after, for a very long time, the rates of profit had dropped drastically, specifically in the West and in the field of productive industrial capital. They either take their companies abroad, where they can still function as productive capitalists by paying the workers abroad less, by lowering the price of the variable capital, or they take the route of financialization and base the essence of their profits off of stock buybacks, interest, and and rents, and all these different forms of hyper parasitic capital accumulations. And that's been the result. And it gave, maybe a couple decades boost to capitalism, but we're seeing that boost itself die out. And its death signifies not just the death of this stage of moribund capitalism, but the death of a system in general. And people have theorized it in various forms, but it's evident to most people, even people within the establishment, that the capitalist imperialist system, rooted as it has been since its inception in the West, in the global minority, is giving way to a new world order, that it is falling, and it is no longer capable of shaping the future, at least not, I don't think, of this 21st century of ours.
Yeah, it's absolutely absurd to just slavishly believe the way Milei does. I mean, let's pretend you're just well, first, what they're deregulating mostly is finance, right? Removing barriers for parasites and Western parasites that are really not even Western anymore, but supranational, just without a country at all, that are preying on different peoples like leeches, just jumping down onto one country and then the next, right? But think about, you're just a regular Argentinian working class Joe, right? And you lose your job because now that there's no minimum wage, they hire a bunch of people that at a lower rate, right? And they continually push it lower and lower and lower until nobody can work there. And so you begin looking for a new job. And your options are one place that'll pay you in cryptocurrency, which you know nothing about, and another place that'll pay you in meat. Like, what? That doesn't even make any sense. It's so absurd. This like people are just buying and selling and just let them do it. That's not how the world works, my friend. It's 2023. But you mentioned Radica too, interestingly, who's a very good friend of the Institute, of all of us. And I swear, I'm 95% sure, as I was waiting in the studio for RT, that I heard her talking to whoever the host was before me. So that was interesting. But it's her analysis of this moribund state of finance capitalism that everything is based in these days. It's her and Hudson, really. They're the innovative political economists we should be paying attention to. And what they talk about is that, well, to put it into like sort of a always going back to the basics term, financialization begins in Lenin's day, right? And goes through a process of nascence and then moribundity, right? Going into existence, going out of existence. And we seem to be entering this period now where this highest stage of capitalism, as Lenin correctly calls it, is now going out of existence, right? Which is literally what Marx was talking about when he talked about the necessary conditions for revolution and change, the forces of production outmoding the relations of production. We're at this point now with full financialization and the speculation as primary capital accumulation era, that the old relations of production are mattering less and less, right? And wages need propped up not by value being created by workers, by extra speculation. So the speculators get in this weird situation where, to keep the underlying issues going, which create a stock value, which is their point, they need to pay workers a certain amount. So it turns us into parasites on ourselves, even, which is wild to think about, but that's where we're at. And I don't know. This leads us into a whole new ball game. And when we add re-proletarianization into the mix and the inability of working people to move forward in the old way, I don't know. That spells revolution to me. I don't know what else it could spell, you know?
Yeah, and it's not just it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. You know, just like October 7 wasn't a question of how did this happen, but when is it going to happen? You can't keep people in those uh, horrendous condition and not expect at some point for things to boil up to a nodal point where there's a leap and people act in revolutionary manners. And we have phrases from our Marxist tradition to depict this. Lenin famously said that there's decades where nothing happens, and then weeks where decades happen. And it's really the fact that in those decades where nothing happens, you have that quantitative accumulation that allows for certain nodal points that occur in those weeks where decades happen, and you have those giant leaps, those social revolutions that move history forward into a new stage. And I think we're on the precipice of those weeks where decades happen, and that's what everyone is seeing and describing in various ways. It presents an existential crisis for the ruling elite in the global north. A very small portion of these countries is not the vast majority of the American or European people. It's a very small portion of them. And it presents tremendous hope for the global majority, for those who have been colonized and imperialized for 400 to 500 years. And it presents a tremendous opportunity as well for the working and popular classes in those countries who are also suffering the brunt of the decay of the system that has created a condition unheard of in the history of modern imperialism, which is that traditionally super exploited classes were found in the imperialized countries, where they can exploit them at rates much higher than those at which the workers in the global north were being exploited. That's why it was super exploitation. And within the core imperialist countries, you could also find it in various sectors of the working class, the black proletariat, indigenous peoples, etc. Today, for the first time, because of the generalization of debt, which Marx considers a secondary form of exploitation in the third volume of Capital, for the first time ever, you have a generalized new form of super exploitation affecting the vast majority of the American people and the vast majority of the people in Europe. And this creates a very interesting condition because it's been those super exploited masses that have acted in the most revolutionary manner throughout the 20th and 21st century. And that is a condition that is now being generalized in the parts of the imperial core that at another time in the last decade were able to be elevated to this level of bourgeoisification that now has been destroyed. Some people call it the death of the middle classes. We call it re-proletarianization. The revolutionary potential that they have has been rekindled by their material status of dependency, necessity, brought about by a system in decay.
Yeah, beautifully said, brother. I mean, Engels calls this bourgeoisification, but he was around only at the very beginning of it, right? As it moves on, especially here in the US, really what the last generation failed to do was understand what was happening. What was happening to class relations in the US? They were changing. And that's organic. It's a product of American pragmatism and empiricism, but it's there. And we're making up for that now because we have to, because we're in this era where, like we were saying, we can't keep going on like this. And that this leads us to realize that, all of these working masses, the creation of the PMC, the better conditions won by the civil rights movement, the trade union movement, etc. All of these create a lack of proletarian character in working people. So what do you do with that, right? Well, Marx tells us these are middle classes. They stand somewhere between the contradiction of the ruling and ruled classes. They're somewhere in the middle, right? But now in our era, that barrier is being removed and they're regaining a proletarian character. Now, here's the big difference. What happened during proletarianization, right? Formerly middle classes, petty artisans, peasants, etc., got thrust into socialized production and privatized profit. There's no more of that socialized production within the imperial core, right? I mean, there's some, I'm part of it, for example, but for the most part, these people have to go into service-based jobs, things like that, and get into incredible debt for even the low tier of the PMC, which is all that's left of it, really. And this isn't enough to live on. So they're exploited in the fact that, yes, they're contributing labor and not getting as much back, but as they need to live back. But really, that exploitation rests in their debt and inability to create wealth, right? The proletarian character of being forced into a position where the only thing you have is your ability to sell your labor. The only difference is there ain't no giant bourgeois factories left.
Beautifully said, brother. Thank you so much to Leticia. I imagine from Brazil. Hello, comrades. I came through Comrade Danny Shaw. He did a live with João Pitillo from Guerra Patriótica here in Brazil. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Leticia. Yeah, Danny's an extremely gifted individual who speaks many, many languages. I don't, maybe.
More than I can even count.
Yeah. So he's getting up there. He's maybe halfway through to the amount that people like Robeson and Engels spoke, but I don't doubt his will to keep learning. And one of the things he emphasizes always is how important this process of learning the knowledge, visiting, learning the language, visiting, and embedding yourself with the people is for learning the people's history. And he's done that definitely in most countries in Latin America and Haiti and in other parts of the world.
Yeah, there's a reason he's directing our entire international department at the Institute. The guy's brilliant and has actually studied and gone to all of these countries and knows the revolutionaries in them. There's a few other questions while we're on the subject of super chats and stuff. I want to get to while we're at it. Rob V asked what my pin is. It's an Irish liberation pin, Chucky Allah, which means our time will come. It was the saying of the IRA. I think Sinn Féin uses it. Irish republicanism, kind of saying in Marxist-Leninism. Bobby Sands famously, that was in his last address before he died during his hunger strike. I put it on because honestly, funny story. I got this American Palestinian friendship pin, right? And plan was wear it anytime I'm doing a big interview or something like that, RT. And so I went to grab it today and it had fallen off my other jacket. So I couldn't get it. So I was like, oh, this one will work. Plus my wife and I have been watching this really good documentary on the Troubles recently. So.
Oh yeah. I remember the words of Che's grandpa who said that through my grandson's veins flows the blood of the Irish revolutionaries. By the way, thank you so much for the $50 Brazilian super chat. It's a People's Funded Institute, so these donations are incredibly important for sustaining our operations. We wouldn't be able to do a fraction of what we do without the financial help that our audience provides for us. And if anyone is interested in helping us in a more consistent manner, consider becoming a patron of the Institute at patreon.com/midwesternmarks. So patreon.com/midwesternmarks if you want to be a Patreon
Was that
or a YouTube member.
patreon.com/midwesternmarks?
Yes. So thank you so much.
It was patreon.com/midwesternmarks, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I just wanted to be sure it was patreon.com/midwesternmarks.
We're selling now like the radio commercials of the people that repeat the same thing 10 times. But thank you so much, Comrade Future Homestead, steady viewer of the Institute and YouTube member. What do you make of the people that claim we are entering into neo-feudalism? Yeah, you have folks like Yanis Varoufakis saying that we have entered a post-capitalist society, that capitalism is dead, and we have joined the ranks of techno-feudalism, and you have this massive fiefdoms controlled by Amazon, Netflix, and these various platforms that literally just rent out their materials, and most of their profits come from rents. I think it's a mistake to label that a whole qualitative transition in the mode of life. I don't think we have overcame capitalism for techno-feudalism, because one of the central components of what capitalism is capital, which is a form of property that its whole purpose is accumulation. If something is not accumulating, it's not capital, right? We can have the same two things next to each other, but if one is used for the purpose of accumulation, it functions as capital within bourgeois property relations, while the other one could be used just for the sake of use, and it's no longer capital. What makes something capital is the relations in which it is being embedded in. And these rents are still functioning as capital because their whole purpose is accumulation. That's not a telos, an end, a purpose that you find in feudalism. That is a almost uniquely capitalist purpose, because even when things were being accumulated in previous empires, it was accumulation for, almost the sake of sustaining the life of luxury and wealth for the elite. It wasn't accumulation for accumulation's sake, and it didn't have the level of necessity for the survival of the society that capitalism does. And what we have here with this techno-feudalism is just capitalism reaching a level of financialization and parasitism that we spoke a little bit earlier when we were covering the segment on Milei. And I think a much more accurate way of describing this is not as a fully qualitative transition into a new mode of life, but as a partially qualitative transition into the stage of neo-imperialism, the higher stage of imperialism, however you want to refer to it. It's when financialization has come to expand to the point where I think 95% of profits derived from American capitalists. A few years ago, I read this recent study that 95% of the profits came from stock buybacks, rents, and interest. So that those are forms of profiting that you find in the feudal world, but the way that they operate within capitalism is uniquely capitalist. And so that's part of the problem with Varoufakis. It's missing the materialist dialectic that'll help you understand that there's no mode of production, there's no mode of life that only has one mode of production. The capitalist mode of production has various different modes of producing things, except the difference is that one is dominant, and it's the capitalist one, and all the other ones are mediated by the dominant one. And the various almost like feudal-like modes of producing that exist within capitalism always operate within forms that are shaped by the capitalist mode of production. And this is the same thing with this technological form.
Yeah, 100%. I have absolutely nothing to add to that, actually.
That's the same thing with China. Like the China, dominant mode of production, socialist, private property, markets, everything else functions in a way that's mediated by the dominant socialist mode of production.
Exactly. And that's a lot of... We're constantly going back to that old zinger from Engels, right? What all these gentlemen lack is dialectics, right? Once you get that, you can understand these things. They become so crystal clear. But Engels, actually, speaking of Engels, had this one-off sentence I read a while. I think it's in Anti-Düring in one of the... oh, crap. I'm throwing my pen. I apologize. In one of the forewords to it, right? where he talks about how the word capitalism came out of Marx, right? Who it wasn't really in use until Marx releases the first edition of Capital, right? And then because of Capital, it starts being called capitalism. Before that, it was liberalism, right? And they would talk about republics. And I don't know how true that is. I have a tendency to believe Engels, take him at his word. But it's interesting to think about when you think about people like Milei, we were talking about earlier, who would tell us capitalism is just human nature, dude. It's always been there. All trade is capitalism, right? But it misses the point. The reason we say capitalism is because it's capitalism, right? It's literally the system based around and because of capital and the rising of capital. There's one more question I want to get to. Boris Negarosa says, oh, look, China fanboy got triggered. I just want to say that we have no idea what you're talking about. We weren't even talking about China, and I don't think we were upset or anything. If you're going around trying to trigger people, you might want to find a little better use of your time, though. Just my 2 cents. Take it or leave it.
Alrighty, so with that, we can go into our next segment, which is on various news concerning Israel-Palestine, some historical videos from Nixon describing the U.S.'s unconditional support for Israel, some contemporary videos from artists describing their support for the Palestinian plight, from mothers describing their suffering, Palestinian mothers describing their suffering after the loss of their children, which is about the most tragic thing I think a human being can experience, seeing your son go or your child go before you. We'll also see some videos of Israelis speaking out against Zionism and describing the role of the Zionist occupational entity. We'll watch a video of Medea Benjamin outside of the headquarters of APAC and tying the connection of U.S. policy with Israel to APAC, which I think there's elements that we can add to that conversation that she doesn't, but it's a short video, so we're not going to blame anyone for missing out. You know, that's something that's often done to the TikTok segment of the Institute, where people tell Eddie, you forgot to say this. And it's like, come on, it's a 2-minute video. And then we'll also cover a thread from Nick Cruz from RBN, where he's talking about who can be held legally responsible for this ongoing genocide. So let's
to get to that, brother. That's going to be really good. Nick is brilliant, man. He's a very insightful guy.
Absolutely. So let me pull up the first video from Nixon. This is from the Nixon Foundation and Instagram, and I think it's going to be fun to break this down, at least in terms of the concept of false consciousness, which we get from Marxism, which some parts of the Western Marxist tradition abandon, but I think they do so foolishly because it's tremendously powerful in helping us understand the inversions at play in bourgeois ideology. But let's give this a watch.
You've said it many times when you were president of the United States that no president is ever going to desert Israel, right?
Correct. I put it more bluntly. I said, as I told congressional leaders during the 1973 Yom Kippur War, no American president will let Israel go down the tube.
All right.
Democrat or Republican. It's not an issue.
That is stated fairly categorically, and yet in your book you make it clear at the same time that Israel really is not of any enormous strategic value to the United States anymore.
That's correct.
So why then would the United States continue to burden itself with huge loans, in some cases outright grants, to the Israelis, jeopardize possibly young American fighting men, when there is no strategic value involved, or little strategic
Because the
value?
United States is concerned by more than strategic values. That's maybe a weakness, but it's the way we are. And there are moral issues involved here. We don't have an alliance with Israel, as you know. They're not an ally of the United States in the technical sense. But we have a bond to Israel that's much stronger. It's a moral commitment because of what happened during the Holocaust, and a moral commitment because it is a democracy, the only democracy in that area. And under the circumstances, that is why American presidents and the American people in the future will support all out the survival of Israel if it's attacked.
Say that you have said it many times.
Before we get into breaking that down, thank you so much, Adlieb Pacheco, for becoming a YouTube member. It's a People's Funded Institute, so these donations and memberships are fundamental for keeping up the stuff we do here at the Midwestern Marx Institute. Our whole purpose is to educate, to change hearts and minds of the American people and of people around the world, but specifically of American people, because we're in the U.S., and that's where our battle is right now. So without some sort of financial ground, we can't do many of the things we do. So thank you so much for the donation. But Noah, what are your thoughts on that?
My mind just stopped at only democracy. I mean, how? Come on. Yes, it's Nixon. Yes, one of the better liars in American history. But I mean, it's for me, it just shows that they pick a strategy that works for them, and they don't stop until it stops working. They still use that same line, right? As if the apartheid regime of Israel is in any way democratic, which is so absolutely ridiculous that we shouldn't even entertain the notion, but that there aren't democratic nations around there, right? What is democracy, right? And this is the sort of liberal formalism that they use to distort language and lie to us with, right? They say that democracy is when you have X, Y, and Z based on what we want, right? But democracy is a very general word, and it means the people, not the establishment, not the elites, not the bourgeoisie or the globalists or the imperialists or whatever you want to call them, right? Not them are in power. That's it. As Carlos says all the time, it's a combination of two Greek words, demos, the people, meaning specifically not the elites, and kratos, or power, people, power. That's what democracy is. And that's what's really important. Are the people of a given society empowered, or aren't they? Right? The people of Israel clearly are not. The people of China clearly are. The people of the US clearly are not. The people of Cuba clearly are. So when we talk about democracy, this liberal formalism is nothing but a mask to hide the truth that they're anything but democratic. Unless we're talking about, in a sense, of for the ruling class, right? Their ruling class of these liberal nations like ours has democratic institutions, but only for their class at the expense of ours.
Yeah, that's excellent. My mind went somewhat elsewhere to just a general theoretical point about the inversions that are systematic and necessary for the reproduction of the capitalist system. And I think here we see it very clearly where, as you mentioned, a state that's rooted in occupation, and ethnic cleansing, that's systematically rooted in apartheid, that's been recognized. All of those things have been recognized by international institutions that in no way can be said to side with oppressed and working people. To say that a state, an apartheid state, is democratic is just completely absurd. It's an inversion of reality. Israel is no more democratic than the U.S. was before 1964, when we literally had an apartheid state. And in the earlier parts of the period from the counter-revolution of 1876 to the Third American Civil Rights Movement, the Third American Revolution of
Let me interrupt
1964.
you real quick, Carlos. I just want to make a distinction that he said counter-revolution of 1876. Go on.
1876. So it's you have a condition where in the U.S. you had lynching, a free-for-all of lynching of black people and those who allied with the plight of the Black Freedom Movement. You can't call that apartheid order where the people that are upheld as more human than than this other group of people. You can't call that democratic, no more than you can call South Africa democratic. And the same thing with Israel. There's nothing democratic about Israel. So saying that there is, it's literally turning reality on its head. And another important point here is that the interviewer brings out this apparent contradiction where on the one side, Nixon says that Israel serves no purpose for the U.S., that the U.S. doesn't benefit from Israel, while on the other side saying that Israel has the unconditional support of the U.S., that every administration will always support Israel. And he tries to dismiss this contradiction, but this contradiction is rooted in the misunderstanding of the point of how it is that the U.S. benefits from Israel. Israel is a creation of the imperialist order, which in its time was a mixture of British and American imperialism and has since been rooted more in functioning as a proxy of American imperialism in West Asia, what the British called the Middle East. Without Israel as a colonial outpost of American imperialism, it is hard to imagine that the murderous operations that the U.S. has waged in West Asia, Middle East, where millions have died and tens of millions have been displaced, it is hard to imagine that those operations could have happened to at the scale of successful displacement and overthrowing at which they did without the state of Israel. So Israel is absolutely fundamental for the geopolitical and economic interests of the U.S. in one of the most important regions of the world that functions as a bridge from Asia to Europe, and that is extremely rich in terms of its resources. We've discussed in previous streams work from Mateo Capasso on the extreme wealth of the region that is occupied by Israel now, and of the role that it plays in the web of the imperialist system as a center point. So what you have there by claiming that there's no utility to Israel is, again, another inversal of reality, because Israel is as useful as another state could be for the American empire, because it is the center out of which they launched their operations in one of the most strategic and important regions in the world that the imperialists have been working very consistently in for a very long time to control. Again, at the ideological level, we see how this order necessitates an understanding of itself in a way that's completely topsy-turvy, in a way that's completely turning things on its head. And that takes the form, in this Nixon interview, of hiding the real, actual geopolitical and economic interests behind U.S. activities through the veil of moralism and U.S. support for Israel as rooted in a commitment to some bullshit notion of democracy that itself is understood in topsy-turvy ways.
Yeah, it's using some direct lies to tell more subtle lies, right? That the entire thing is dishonest, and you got to know that Nixon knew that. Nixon was a smart guy. He was in with the intelligence agencies from the beginning. But yeah, that's all it is. I'm really interested though in the mother of the dead Palestinian girl that was speaking out on social media, saying that Israel is only good at bombing innocent civilians and children. This is what, yeah, I really wanted to get into this. We have some more super chats and questions. Don't worry, we'll get to them, but I gotta get at this first.
She's saying, I swear they haven't hit a single Hamas target. Hamas hits them hard at night, then they strike women and small children at night. You're not able to confront Hamas, so you kill the children and the small ones. They're killing children. I swear they're killing children. They're 16, 17 years old. Damn the Arabs, specifically those that have not came out in support of the Palestinian plight, as they should be doing. Damn the Zionists, and damn the Americans, of course, who use the taxpayer dollars of their people to fund and equip this genocidal regime. God will punish them. May God seek revenge on them. They killed my daughter. Extremely gut-wrenching video there, and I think this is an important point to make, which is that in terms of the actual fighting against Palestinian liberation forces, the Zionists have completely lost. They cannot beat the Palestinians, and they won't. They won't beat the Palestinians. They won't beat the Yemenis, the Houthis. They won't beat Hezbollah, and they sure as shit won't beat Iran. So the only thing that Israel is good at is systematically annihilating innocent people, children and women, and bombing buildings where civilians live to the ground. It is a Nazi regime, and it is a tragedy that the basis upon which they legitimize the ethnic cleansing of a people is an ethnic cleansing of the Jewish people. It is disgusting and disturbing that they use the horrendous legacy of what the Jewish people have had to face to legitimize the oppression of a racist, supremacist, apartheid, genocidal state that in reality does anything but make Jews safer, because they propel these wars against regular innocent people. They kill children, and they put on all of their institutions, on their missiles, on everything, the Star of David. That is not making Jews safer. On the contrary, as Katie Halper has mentioned, it's making Jews less safe. It's making anti-Semitism spread, as it's a natural phenomenon when this fascist Nazi state claims itself to be the state of the Jewish people. And more Jewish people, whether it's Jewish Voices for Peace, if not now, and other organizations of Jewish activists, are saying, no, we do not stand for the Zionist extermination of the Palestinians. This is not what Judaism is about. This is not what our tradition teaches us. Some of the most fervent anti-Zionists have been the Orthodox Hasidic Jews. And this is a strictly imperialist project that has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with defending the interests of imperialism in the Middle East.
Yeah, she says something near the end. And she says, history will curse them. Think about how we view the Nazis right now. At the time, in the U.S., there were supporters, not insignificant numbers, of Hitler and the Nazi regime. Anti-communist forces, right? This is how the Zionism is going to be remembered. Anything that they could have made some positive change is gone now. There was a way to turn it around, and now there no longer is. This right now, will be what Zionism is remembered for. And that they do this, speaking on behalf of Jewish people everywhere is absolutely absurd. Like you were saying, Carlos, the amount of Jewish people speaking out against them is unreal. There's just so many, like so many. But yeah, it's disgusting. I don't think we really need to go on and on about it. Macklemore said something really cool, though. If you want to pull that up, Carlos.
Before we get to that, because we were hitting on the Jewish folks that have been speaking out against Zionism. Here's Jewish Israeli folks who have been kind of exposing what it really is that the so-called only democracy in the Middle East is doing.
That we have in this country is the operational wing of Jewish supremacy in the area, and it's bent on the oppression of the Palestinian people. And I refuse to take part in that oppression and instead fight against it in my activism.
I cannot take part in something that is so immoral, that is so unjust. This is genocide that has been going on since the beginning of the Zionism.
I don't wish to serve an army that is enacting an occupation, an apartheid regime.
Hamas attack was horrible. The whole country is in grief right now.
I do not think that it is in a vacuum. I see that the occupation and the closing of Gaza are the main parts that made this.
Now, this war in the first day was a defensive war, but after that it became totally an offensive war against the civilians in Gaza. I refuse the notion that killing civilians in Gaza will bring security to anyone.
For the Israelis, anti-Zionists, we are really in a problem right now because the fascization of Israel has gone into a new stage. We're scared of the government, we're scared of the army, of the police. We cannot go into the streets, the media is suppressing us.
And I'm also very scared now for my friends in the West Bank who are being violently evicted from their homes. I'm scared for the people of Gaza who are being bombed relentlessly. I think Palestinians deserve freedom just as much as Israelis.
The army that we have.
So, if you don't want to listen to historians, Arab historians, American historians, if you don't want to listen to anti-Zionist Jewish historians, at least listen to them, to people who have seen it with their own eyes, in the same way that people who serve in our armed forces, most of them come back with such wounds that it's impossible for a lot of them to not realize that they were sent over there to various countries whom they probably couldn't have pointed out in a map before they went, to kill people whom they have more in common with than the elites who send them there. So it's very clear here that we're dealing with an apartheid, genocidal state. And look, the reaction that one of these, this guy specifically on the screen now had, condemning October 7th and considering that the first day was a defensive war, that's wrong. I think that's wrong. I find it difficult to understand the complexity of the oppression present in the occupation, in the blockade, in the situation that Palestinians are forced into in Gaza and in the West Bank, and then somehow say that, yes, after 75 years of this occupation, it's wrong to have something like October 7 happen. No, the question is, when is it going to happen, not if. It's when, and it happened in October 7th, and anyone that stands with people's movements for liberation cannot sit there and condemn October 7th on the basis of atrocity propaganda that has already been confirmed to be baseless. Where are the 40 beheaded babies? Where are the rape charges of Hamas? What we do have is leading figures, religious figures in Israel, who exert great influence over Israeli armed forces, over the armed bodies of men of the Zionist state, saying that it's perfectly legitimate to rape enemy women and to kill kids. That is things that we can actually prove and provide a plethora of evidence for. What we cannot provide, and what has not been provided any evidence for, is any of the atrocities that the Israelis have claimed that Hamas has done. On the contrary, the evidence that we have had of Israelis' engagement with with Hamas in the form of hostages has been extremely positive. There was literally a mother who said that Hamas made her daughter feel like a princess. There was Israeli hostages that declined meeting with Netanyahu and that said that, condemned everything that we're doing to the Palestinian people. Once they were able to break the veil of ideological dehumanization that they were socialized into as Israelis and see the reality, it was like and this is an example I often use, it was like the slaves in Plato's allegory of the cave that broke out and were able to see the light. These people saw the light. So that's those things we have evidence for. So, but either way, even though this is still some form of a liberal dissent, it is still extremely positive, and it shows that it shows to a certain extent the reality of the Israeli apartheid regime. But I think Noah's out. He's okay. He has a family emergency. I'll put him down here in the back room, and we can get to the other video that I had planned. I think Noah wanted to react to Macklemore, so I'll play another one from Medea Benjamin, where she's speaking outside of an APAC building and describing the intimate connection of our ruling elite and the Zionist apartheid.
Medea Benjamin with the Peace Group Code.
So let's give this a watch. Thank you to everyone commenting, sending questions, sending super chats. We'll get to these as soon as we're done with this Palestine and Israel segment, which is a couple more videos deep. So we'll get to that in just a second, but let's give this a quick watch.
Hi, my name is Medea Benjamin with the Peace Group Code Pink, and I'm standing in front of this nondescript building at 251 H Street Northwest in Washington, D.C. But guess what? It's actually the headquarters of the largest foreign policy lobby group in the United States called APAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. I wonder why it doesn't display its name. Maybe it doesn't want you to know it's here. Maybe it's because it prefers to work in the shadows, sending millions of dollars to politicians, and in return, wanting those politicians to send billions of dollars to Israel. That's why almost $4 billion of our tax money every year is going to Israel. And that's why, in the midst of Israel's full-on genocide in Gaza, APAC wants to send $14 billion more. APAC is livid that some members of Congress, under tremendous pressure from their constituents, have dared to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. That's why APAC says it's going to spend $100 million in the coming election to oppose them. Congresswoman Betty McCullen has called APAC a hate group. AOC says it's a racist group that disproportionately targets members of color. And Congressman Mark Pocan says it's a cancerous presence on our democracy. Politicians have good reason to fear APAC, which has shown a mafia-like ability to make and break careers. But we, the people, must stand up to it. We must make it toxic for politicians to take APAC money. We must support Jewish groups calling for a ceasefire, like Jewish Voice for Peace, and if not now. And we must continue to build a torrential wave of people power so strong that politicians will have no choice but to do the right thing, to call for a ceasefire, to stop sending our money to Israel, and to stand up for a free Palestine. And one more thing. Let's make APAC register as an agent of a foreign government, because after all, that's precisely what it is.
Beautifully said. Tremendously important points. You know, one of the things that we've been emphasizing since the onslaught of the intensified war against the Palestinians after October 7th is that not all protests, specifically in the belly of the beast, are equal. There's some protests that just really cause inconvenience and annoy working people, such as going to Starbucks and and just reading a script to the baristas and the Starbucks workers, and doing that 30 times with different so-called organizers. And it's also not, in my view at least, an effective protest to shut down a bridge where working people are necessarily using it to commute. Those provide inconveniences for working people, and it's working people whom we need to bring to our side, who we need to convince. And you don't convince people by annoying them, by talking down on them, and by creating a tremendous inconvenience in their already miserable lives because of the system that we exist in. That's not how you obtain consent, in my view at least. But there's been other protests that have been great. There's been protests in front of L3 Harris, led by Canadian workers. There's been protests in BlackRock headquarters, and protests that have stopped shipments of arms to Israel. And right here, we have perhaps one of the most important forms of protesting, the APAC lobby. The APAC lobby, which literally buys our politicians at an individual level and is a central component of the relationship that the U.S. empire has to its colonial outposts in the Middle East in the form of Israel. So it's a dialectical relationship because the U.S. needs Israel for the reasons that we've been unfolding in this segment. But it's also the case that you still need that Israel lobby to continue funneling money to politicians because it's very easy as individuals for them to see what's happening and to, maybe say something as others have done in the past. We've seen Jimmy Carter. We've reacted to Jimmy Carter criticizing the state of Israel as an apartheid state. It's very easy for that to happen, and it becomes harder for that to occur once you have a fat load of cash in your pocket that has been given to you by APAC, and when you have fear that turning against the Zionist entity is going to mean the end of your political career in the form of APAC attacks against you. So it's important to expose it and to draw these connections, which are necessary to convince people between what Israel is doing with U.S. taxpayer dollar and how it connects to American working people here at home who are funding a genocide while our streets and our cities crumble and we don't have health care. We die from lack of health insurance and from other means, addictions, and all these different horrendous things that we find in our people's everyday conditions. So that connection, I think, is important, and I think Medea did a good job there at exploring it.
I think what she was doing was showing that our democracy is not democracy at all, right? That our politicians are being bought and sold by these giant lobbies, right? And sometimes they work for other governments. Doesn't matter as long as that money's there, right? What does she say? That we need to build people power to demand our politicians represent our interests rather than the interests of these corporations. What is that, right? That is our government working for those corporations and not us as a regular way of doing things. That, my friends, is not democracy at all. That is the opposite of democracy. That is all of the corporations getting together and saying, well, we'll fund this guy because he'll do what we want in this situation. This guy says no, so we better get someone else in there that will. That's how it works. And people realize that. We're beginning to get to this situation now where all over the country, people are waking up to the fact that what they tell us is a democracy is not, that we have no power. And if we want it, we're going to have to stand up, fight, and take it. And that's exactly what I plan to do. I don't know about you guys.
That's beautifully said. Yeah, and it's not just one issue here, one issue there. It's a whole damn system that's created for them, by them, and of them. I guess I should have said of them, by them, for them, and not of, by, and for the vast majority of the American people who have to suffer under its boot. But this is Macklemore, one of the main forms that descent to the Zionist entity has taken is various artists, people who, because of our celebrity culture, which there's many things we can say about it, have some cachet and could be used to transform hearts and minds. And quite a few of them have been on the right side of this issue. Macklemore has been one that has been on the right side since very early on, and here he is in a concert reading a letter that is quite moving. So let's listen to it.
When I say free Palestine, it's not against anyone. It actually means we should protect everyone. It means equality for all, respect, peace, and love. It means a right to exist regardless of what sector you're from. My intention is to never offend anyone. I want every soul in this arena to feel the reflection of love. But there's innocent humans out in Gaza getting murdered with our dollars, and those precious human lives are an extension of us. I can't get up here in a fur coat, jump around and pretend while in my gut's saying, you know better, Ben. The ancestors yelling, you better step up for us. I love my Jewish brothers and sisters so much, and my perspective is one that's saying free Palestine is also rooted in your protection, my loves. And there isn't a drop of anti-Semitic thought in my head or my blood. Never again means never again for all. Have we not learned the lessons, my love? The self-centering around what is potentially threatening to us is actually at the root of what disconnects all of us. The word genocide is such a point of contention for some that it's more hurtful than seeing dead babies getting pulled out of the crumbled cement and the dust. Comparative suffering leads to believing the lie. There's a them and there's a us. It's a lie. We don't own this earth. We're just guests here, my love. And at some point in time, we drew lines in the mud based on the color of our skin, the gods we worshiped, and the divine up above. And historically, we've exploited black and brown bodies to climb up the rungs, but the ladder doesn't work when it depends on the oppression of some. And I've been hearing the earth cry lately. Yeah, the deepest cries, my, oh my, what have we done? We got some work to do to unlearn and rewire the plugs that are short-circuiting in a selfish cycle, and we're blind to the drug that we're all addicted to. Me, myself, I, and not us. In this moment in time, we're being called to rise and become. See ourselves in the pain of others and not separate from them. And I'ma say it till I die, with my chest to the sky. Free Palestine. The message is love.
You know,
Oof.
I fucking hated that video. I did not want to like Macklemore. And it made me like Macklemore. That's outrageous, right? No, seriously, what a great speech. This guy is just a regular dude making music, and he sees this, right? He sees that the reason people are upset is because we see our humanity reflected in the humanity of people in Palestine, right? We see their struggle reflected in every video we watch, right? And we see dead children. We see bombs on civilians. We see all of this talk of terrorism and Hamas, but at the end of the day, all it is talk. They can try to tell us that, you know, free Palestine or from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is somehow anti-Semitic, but listen to the words, right? There's nothing anti-Semitic in there. Not a single syllable, right? What it means is that Palestinian people deserve life and freedom the same way anybody else does. That the freedom of one is the freedom of all, that you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And this reminds me a lot to a video from Roger Waters that I discussed some weeks ago, which is that, I mean, Macklemore is not working from the position of like a Marxist-Leninist or something, or a communist. He's just someone who actually accepts the bourgeois ideals, very noble ideals of life, liberty, equality, fraternity, universal humanity. And the truth is that the bourgeoisie has never been able to live up to these ideals that are very noble, and it's only really socialism that can live up to those ideals, because we're the ones striving to create a society where the exploitation of the many by the few, and the oppression of the many by the few in order to sustain that exploitation and enrichment of the few is destroyed, systematically dismantled, and a new order where society can actually serve society is established. The only way to realize the noble ideals of the progressive earlier bourgeoisie, which are still embedded in the people's common sense, is through socialism. But what you find is that when people align themselves with these ideals and actually look at reality and see past the propaganda and the lies and the atrocity propaganda, they see this gap between the ideals that the bourgeoisie enunciates for itself in order to defend itself and the reality of its actions, its systems, and the actual world that it produces. And on the basis of these gaps, you have people like this that are able to condemn the actions of imperialism through the ideals that the imperialist system uses to legitimize itself. And we saw this with Roger Waters. Anyone who actually believes in equality, in fraternity, and liberty, and life, and freedom, and democracy cannot, even if you understand it through the bourgeois lens, you still cannot support what Israel is doing. It's very clearly a genocide. So as more and more people see this hypocrisy between the enunciated ideals of the bourgeoisie and the reality of the order that it creates, more and more are going to rethink those ideals, rethink the possibility of actually actualizing them within the confines of capitalist society, and see that the rational kernel in those ideals can only really be realized in another social order. And that's been the process of radicalization here in the US. We have a transition from some of the more noble Jeffersonian democratic ideals that are then interrogated by the early socialists in the 1820s, folks like Cornelius Blatchley, Langdon Bilsby, and many, many others, who say, well, you say you stand for life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, fraternity, all these different values, but we don't see any of that in this order. And so they see the logical and practical conclusion of an actual fidelity to those values in socialism. And whether it's in the 1820s or now, I think people are going to begin to see those gaps between the ideals, the reality, and that's going to help them move towards more radical positions, especially if Marxists, people who understand this systematically, are there to help that transition along.
Yeah, there were a few main theorists of our initial bourgeois revolution, right? Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. But the notion of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is a sort of update on a slogan from John Locke, who said life, liberty, and property, right? This is an important step forward. And it's not that the bourgeois revolutionaries didn't believe in these ideals, right? We want to remember that belief is not concrete change, right? That because they thought they were going to fulfill these doesn't mean that they, or because they thought of these doesn't, because these ideals didn't get fulfilled. I'm sorry, I'm spacey. Because they didn't get fulfilled does not mean they didn't believe in them. Only that, as Engels notes in talking about the revolutions in France, the kingdom of reason becomes nothing but the kingdom of the bourgeoisie. In concrete reality, it can't become anything but that. So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which are supposedly guaranteed rights for us here in the US, meaning they were fought for and won, can only come about through that process of fighting, right? Do we have a right to life? Well, does the working class have that, or does only the ruling class who holds our very health for ransom have that? We must pay them and enrich them in order to live, period, in some way or another. They have monopolized land, right? They have monopolized health, etc. Do we have our own liberty? Well, do we? Can I go outside and spend my life the way I see fit? No. I need to, in order to have a tiny amount of that, a small couple hours to myself, I need to submit my liberty to the boss, right? And guess what? In pursuit of these same parasites enriching themselves. How about that pursuit of happiness? Well, that depends on the first two, doesn't it? We don't have any of the three. But I see that you pulled up Nick's post from RBN. Nick Cruz is brilliant. And you know what? Someone said this earlier in the chat, and I agree. Watching his analysis get sharper and sharper over time is an absolute pleasure. This guy is incredibly insightful. I'm very proud to call him a friend.
Yeah, no, by the way, that last those last series of points you were making were very, very important and good. So here's a screenshot of Article 4 of the ratification of the Genocide Convention. And here's what it says. Importantly, the convention establishes on state parties the obligation to take measures to prevent and to punish the crime of genocide, including by enacting relevant legislation and punishing perpetrators, whether they are constitutionally responsible rulers, public officials, or private individuals. And here's Comrades Nick's astute analysis. According to the Genocide Convention, not only should the states executing a genocide be held accountable, but all private entities assisting the genocide. Also, all states in compliance are obligated to do everything they can to stop said genocide, including going after private entities. Not only is what Yemen doing in the Red Sea legal, they are clearly the only state in compliance and following the Genocide Convention. America and Europeans love making these conventions and laws while only weaponizing it against their international enemies and the global south as a way of control. Why do we allow them to do this? I'm not going to let Zionists sweep the Genocide Convention under the rug because it's inconvenient. And that's perfectly sad. And when we go back to the text of the classics of Marxism, when they speak about false consciousness, whether it's explicitly using the term in the case of Engels or implicitly using the concept, explicitly using the concept but without the term in the case of Marx and Engels in the German ideology, one of the central examples has always been judicature, so laws, rights, and how those function as a deeply embedded form of false consciousness that turns the operation of the world on its head. Instead of seeing it as a reflection of the property relations or relations of production, the mode of production, the economic base of society, they see it as the cause of everything else. And what Comrade Nick here is doing is showing a form that this false consciousness takes. And it's, in essence, the bourgeoisie sets up these lofty laws which make its outlook as coherent as possible on paper. But then in reality, the law was never something that essential. It was always something used to legitimize whatever they're doing at the level of political economy. And so the U.S. breaks it at will. And when it's convenient on the basis of lies and propaganda about another country to say that another country is violating it, they persecute it. The law is, in essence, just an instrument used by the economically dominant class in order to further its interests and reproduce the dominant order. And this is seen very clearly here. If we followed actual international law, bourgeois though it may be, all of these people, our whole government, a whole bunch of corporations, and the vast majority of the governments that have been silent about this ongoing genocide should be held guilty. They should be tried at The Hague. As we just posted a clip recently of Tony Montero, where he makes it clear from the interview that he did with us. If you apply international law, all of these people should be tried no different from the people tried at the Nuremberg trials. But it's that gap between the ideas and the institutionalization of those ideas and laws and the reality that I think Nick is here exposing beautifully.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know what else to add other than that this really ties into the way they operate on everything and how laws are written and interpreted and reinterpreted and enforced based solely on the interests of the ruling class. Excuse me. Whether that was, for instance, the robber barons in the early 20th century or the financial institutions now, right? They are doing this politically right now against Donald Trump, right? Who's a part of them. But it's not as if they don't have contradictions amongst themselves. Donald Trump sort of takes the mask off imperialism, and they're preventing him from getting on ballots right now. And it's the same sort of thing, right? I don't want to get into that ahead of time. But it just strikes me as always the same. Before we get into that, though, I think we should go over all the super chats because they were piling up. Battle Cossack, thank you so much for the 50. Says, libertarians say that commies are lazy. They want everything free. How can I explain to them in a way they will understand? Great question. And my show, Real Talk, which is going to be a call-in show, is launching next week. And this is exactly the sort of thing that we're going to be discussing all the time. So if you have any more questions along these lines, feel free to call into this. Sorry, I don't like the just my face real big. We got to change that. But here is basically what I do, what works for me. And I say, okay, when have I ever asked you for anything for free? When have I ever been lazy with you? Right? Because I haven't. And this is what I'm talking to coworkers. I'm generally the guy they call when they need to call off. They need someone to cover. I never put my work on other people, etc. Right? And I say, let's think about this. You and I are working here, right? We're not asking for anything for free. Nothing. We are happy to work for what we get. Who's getting the free ride here? It's the boss, right? They're the ones who want everything free. They want us to do their work so they can sit on their soft-handed, entitled, spoiled asses, right? Because they don't want to do the work. We do. And that's what it is. So if we're talking about not wanting people getting things for free, that's capitalism, my friend. Socialism, communism. Communists are the ones that end that. We get rid of the parasite. That boss wants to eat. Get a job like the rest of us, you bum. It's that simple, brother. It is that simple. Thank you so much for the super chat and the question. I'm sort of scrolling through now because Carlos was handling that. So give me 1 second here. Oh, there he is. He's back. All right. Oh, thank you, Pop Sacks, for the $20. Carlos usually says this, but for real, we have no funding whatsoever other than y'all. So thank you guys so much. Every dime in our budget comes from super chats, comes from you going to what site, Carlos? You missed your cue. MidwesternMarks.com/ or Patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. That was it. Anyway, thank
I
you.
have to get a few crackers in the system. I apologize.
Yeah,
I'm starving.
you're horrible at this. I mean, you're not even working at this point. You're just a lazy commie who wants something for free.
Just hanging out and eating crackers. Yeah, as a good settler. Thank you so much.
We're the oppressors. I forgot about that. Immigrants are the oppressors according to ultras. Anyway, Popsatch says, I was just thinking about that. Why would we make a whole financial system that embraces this supposed inherent human selfishness instead of making a system that suppresses that and promotes a healthier collective mindset? I think that's a good question, right? Often when you come across like a libertarian type or someone who's, watched Fox News or something along these lines, they talk about, well, you can't do communism. It's against human nature. Like, what are you talking about, right? What Marxism does, though, the actual, worldview and methodology that we use in Marxism is gives us a deeper insight into the nature of humans, right? How it isn't just that we have this static nature that never changes. A brief look into history will show you it's changing all the time, right? That the humans of 1700s England are not the humans of 2023 USA, right? That our nature is sort of built out of the world around us. We before we even have a thought and cognize it, we are built from the world that shapes that and determines what kind of thought that is, what we're thinking about, our responses to different stimuli. All that stuff is bound up with continually changing conditions. And so when libertarians talk of human nature, I say, no, it's you who don't understand human nature, my friends. Let me teach you some Marxism so you can.
Yeah, that's wonderfully said. And, this is, I think what Popsatch is also pointing at here is a contradiction, because the same people grounded in bourgeois individualism who say that human nature is nasty, brutish, and short, as Hobbes would say, that people are just selfish, and the worst parts of humanity are really the essential character of what it means to be human. Are the same people?
He called it the world of total sin or something crazy. Oh no, that was Calvin.
Nasty, brutish, and short. That's the phrase Hobbes uses. But the same people who hold that on one side want to defend the system that is based, according to them, more on human nature. So you want to hold that human nature is this horrible thing, and at the same time you want a system that promotes this human nature, or that's the most in line with the human nature. So all you're saying is that we're shitty, and we want a system that attenuates to our shittiness and that promotes our shittiness. That's just it's horrendous, and there's a few layers to unpack there. Of course, the one that you unpacked, which is that they have a very mystified abstract, and you could prove it through anthropology and economic anthropological studies, how deeply wrong and just laughable their assumptions of human nature are. But this contradiction is so evident, and I think that a lot of the people that end up with libertarian ideas do it because it's the only visibly findable so-called alternative to the establishment. And it's, thankfully for us, it's riddled with these absurd contradictions and these easily debunkable points. So it makes it very easy for us to convince a lot of our libertarian coworkers and family members and folks in our communities, because they already have the sort of inclination to dissent to the status quo. We just have to show them that what they have been told is dissent is actually just a pocket like any other of bourgeois ideology. It's not actually anti-establishment, and show them what actually opposing the system is, which requires thinking actually systematically. And I think the Marxist worldview is the most capable one of aiding that transition.
And not only that, the establishment is very aware that this is the first stop on the road of dissidence, right? And so what they do is use their media machine and the academy to spread a sort of vulgarized libertarianism that isn't even nearly as deep as the actual libertarian theorists are, right? I've read the Austrians, I've read Chicago Boys stuff. I read the Marginalists back in the day, right? And the old conservative revolution. These people were actually thinkers. Now, I disagree with them. They were wrong and dogmatic and all kinds of utopian, all kinds of stuff. But what we get instead is this very vulgarized, surface level sort of liberalized version that allows the establishment to use slogans that sort of trigger those libertarian feelings to rip off the people more and more, right? This whole like small state thing and deregulation always goes in a singular direction, right? It isn't get rid of bureaucratic red tape that prevents regular people from participating economically. That's actually there, right? It's never that. They never get rid of that. What they do is they get rid of restrictions on giant financial institutions to prey upon people more and more parasitically, to again get something for nothing. That is what it always ends up being. And the original, like, even the Austrians would be outraged that their thought is being used in such a manner. There are even libertarians around right now that remark on this. I just had a very pleasant conversation with the Libertarian Party of Utah people who are like right now combating that very vulgarization. Now, I'll, school them on the real world any day of the week. But when it comes to this, they're headed in the right direction. I think that that's sort of the next stop on a real solution to the establishment.
That's a wild party, though. They have
oh yeah,
clubs that have made defenses of slavery and who are against the advancements. Against the advancements of the civil rights revolution.
That's what you get when you have such a fear of authority that you let anybody in, right? And no discipline.
What? Literally the authority. Oh man. But thank you so much. By the way, thank you for the $20 pop stats. I was gone getting my crackers while Noah was talking about it. But thank you again, Beto Kozak. Have you been in Chiapas? Have you visited the Zapatista territory? Do you think they are truly socialist? I have not. When I went to Mexico, I was pretty much limited to Mexico City and some of the outskirts of Mexico City to go give a lecture in the UACM, the Autonomous University of Mexico City. That's what it was called in English, which was a city that their motto was nothing human is alien to me. It's a deeply critical anti-capitalist university in one of the poorest parts of the country, and its whole purpose is to educate these people so that they can go on and make socially transformative change. And it's received a lot more funding since the 4T, Fourth Transformation Revolutionary process of AMLO has gotten up and running. But no, I haven't visited Zapatista territory. The early Zapatistas were pretty cool. They had some anarchistic ideas, but they were supportive of the Bolsheviks and of similar socialist experiments. There's a strong tendency of anarchism in various parts of Latin America that functions a little bit differently from how it functions in the U.S., where there's possibilities of collaborating with progressive communist forces. I don't know if that's still true in Mexico, but From what I've heard, I have a professor who taught at in Sinaloa, and there's various areas there where he was able to intermingle with Zapatistas and people from the Socialist Party. And the stories that I've heard is that they're very much based in cooperative enterprises, almost similar to what Richard Wolff promotes. And I don't think there's anything antagonistic there to the project of Marxist Leninists and communists. On the contrary, Lenin sees cooperatives as an important form of socialist property. And of course, within capitalism, it functions within the laws of the capitalist anarchic market, but it's still, I think, a different mode of production, a different way of producing, and much more in line with socialism than with capitalism. When I'm back home in Carpenter, one of my favorite places to eat at is this little cooperative joint where the workers are just like happy as shit all the time, and they're super nice, and you feel the difference eating there than eating in just one of these major monopolies, or picking up your groceries in one of the major monopolies where people are getting paid shit and they really have no incentive in the growth or decline of the company. In these cooperatives, at least some form of connection of the workers and the community to how well the company does is established. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've never been there too. I've been to Mexico a few times. I do know a little about them. I know that they're constantly telling people they're not anarchists.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
The anarchists have very few successful stories, and stories about anything other than them being rabid anti-communists, terrorists, murderers, etc. Right? So they really hang on to the Zapatistas, and the
one in Spain, the Madrigal.
Yeah, well, I was talking about the CNT FAI in Spain, which ended up being very counter-revolutionary towards the end. But anyway, yeah, they're not Marxists. They're, doing their thing. They're doing what they need to in order to survive in a very hostile environment. And lately have been talking about adding something else. I forget what it was. I don't want to misspeak, so I'm going to stop on that.
Alex Jones drinks their coffee.
I've had, they sell coffee beans to Starbucks too.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Starbucks has a Chiapas roast, which I mean will surely, all the like blue-haired.
How do you know, sir?
Huh?
Have you been to Starbucks recently?
A good friend of mine works at a Starbucks, and we talked about that when they were unionizing. He was heading up the effort in Ohio.
Have you now, or have you ever been to Starbucks?
Starbucks Italian roast is one of the best coffees in the world. Fuck it, I don't care.
No, I've been boycotting.
I don't. No, there's not even a Starbucks around my house, actually. Okay, but yeah, so I have something of a time limit coming up that I didn't even realize we would get to. We've been going almost 2 hours now, and I didn't even realize it. But yeah, I wanted to get to Sean Moon's question. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Brother Sean, for the $20 super chat. I feel the need to say this, but these are tremendously important for keeping up the operations of the Institute. Unfortunately, we don't live in a socialist society where the state can just pay us to be educators and do the work that we do. So grassroots funding is all we have. So this is tremendously appreciated.
We are open to Chinese billionaires funding us. Just saying. Just saying.
Anything that moves the class struggle forward, honestly. But studying Marxism, I'm constantly trying to understand international finance. Why does China help fund the U.S. government through the purchase of treasuries? China owns $850 billion in U.S. debt. That's our defense budget. Why? do you want to take a stab at this? This is a hefty.
Yeah, it is. So what? I don't believe it's 850 billion. I think that's an old estimate that was never very. Doesn't matter. So China financializes, right, based in the need to continue a sort of détente with the U.S., but their financialization is a socialist financialization, right? They're still more of an industrialist base of their economy. The ownership of debt is based in making China an essential part of the global economy in order to ensure its safety, right? This is sort of a new tactic that was similar to the trade deals with Nixon in the Mao era, right? All of the entire Chinese economic plan is based on making Chinese production, Chinese money, etc., essential and sort of bulletproof, that they can't be blockaded the way Cuba is, right? Or the way the Soviet Union was. And so it's less that they're, how do you put it? Funding the US government from it. It's that they're holding these bonds because it assures their safety in a way. Now, their production does so a lot more so, and you're going to see, as Russia has been trying to convince them for quite some time, more of a move towards gold. A lot of this also is based in the fact that the dollar was hegemonic, right? And back, I think it was maybe 15 years ago. God, I think it was right after 2008, right? That Russia was literally trying to convince China to convert all its dollars into gold at the same time and destroy the American dollar, right? For good, never have to worry about it again. That was against China's interests at the time. They're now slowly moving off of this. And you're going to see, as the dollar weakens, China owning less treasury bonds, less American dollars in debt, etc.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the statistics of the trends, because it is at like 859 billion. Almost.
See, I thought it was high.
Billion.
I'm sorry, I thought it was higher than that, but maybe I was wrong.
Yeah, those are I think 2022 statistics. So yeah, I mean, and China approaches the world through a very pragmatic form, and it participates in the global institutions that exist, and they're capitalist in character, and it does it not for the same sake through which dictatorships of capitalist country does it. It does it for a different purpose, to develop its own country, to modernize, to have the four modernizations that Zhao and Lai enumerated, and use that development to feed the movement, the transition to socialism and a more advanced stage of socialism, and ultimately towards a stage where that sort of participation is no longer needed. I don't think we're there yet. But it is true that China has been able to become essential for the global capitalist class, and that gives it power. And that power is in the hands of a state led by a communist party that represents the people. And I think it's one of those pragmatic moves that, if you look at it from a certain angle, you might be like, well, is that the breaking principle? And if you look at it from another angle, you're like, well, I guess you have to crack some eggshells to make an omelet. And if there's something that's guaranteed, is that they make pretty good fucking omelets. They've lifted 900 million people out of poverty. So
it's also just an investment too.
Yeah.
They're not doing this altruistically in any way. Every return they make on their investments is put back into the Chinese people and what they call the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, right? That's their goal. They're not super concerned with following any dogmas of how people believe they should build socialism, but more actually in real time enriching the people. Which actually brings up, you know what? We should go into
the Mao
in China. Yeah.
Yeah, way ahead of you. I already pulled it up.
Excellent. Put it up. Let's watch it. It's a video that's going viral right now of ultra lefts and Maoists protesting in China right now, calling the current Xi government revisionist and things like that. And I think it's really interesting because this is exactly what we're constantly told by our ruling class is illegal and can't happen in China, right? That people are all oppressed and afraid to speak out. And the only reason that the government enjoys such big support is because people are too afraid and they'll all be shot and killed or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is from Red, which has a distinctively ultra-left tone to some of their posts. Hundreds of Chinese communist youths gather for a huge demonstration at the Mao Zedong Square in the city of Shaoshan, Mao's birthplace, on the eve of the communist leader's birthday, which was the 26th. With paroles echoing across the square, the protesters condemned the capitalist restoration processes of the ruling Communist Party of China, calling for a return to socialism and collectivization. The protests were part of the broader celebrations of the 130th anniversary of Mao's birth. Over 111,000 people visited his hometown Shaoshan in the Hunan province, marking a 713% increase from last year, according to local authorities, who organized various activities to commemorate the special event. Not long after the death of the Chinese communist leader Mao Zedong, and this is whatever the fuck, then revisionism, capitalist rotor, blah, blah, blah.
Revisionism.
You know, what's interesting here is that it's the youth, right? So the youth is usually the people who are perhaps more susceptible to reading the classics in a more dogmatic and idealist and utopian form. So I don't mind having sectors of the youth have a little bit of ultra leftists in them. My only concern here is the following. I don't want.
You know how we have that saying, like, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative when you're old.
Yeah.
There's definitely a communist version of that, right?
Yeah.
If you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart. But if you're not a Marxist-Leninist when you're old, you have no brain.
There you go. Yeah. So I'm not really concerned about it. And I know that in terms of the popularity of the Chinese government, specifically the Xi government, the current Xi government, it's just through the roof. I mean, it's if you compare it to the U.S., it's like, I mean, you can't compare it. So I don't have that big of a problem with this, and it's on the occurrence of Mao's birthday, and we know that there's a bunch of different perspectives that are within the CPC, and that's fine. Within the revolution, everything outside of it, nothing. As of right now, these people aren't calling for the U.S. to help overthrow the capitalist rotors and to put a modern day Mao in power. So, but the danger is that the U.S. doesn't care if it's right, left, up, down, whatever groups it could use as a proxy to topple governments. It will do so. So, I mean, there's a genuine concern here that, to what extent can they use the ultra left to attempt to make moves against a extremely popular and successful Chinese Communist Party? We'll see. I don't think that they'll be that successful, but I'm obviously not as hopeful at all for these sorts of protests as some of the Maoist friends online have shown, and I'm also not that concerned as some of my other friends have shown in the comments that these are just folks that are setting the base for an attack on the Chinese state. I think it's not really a big deal. I don't think there's much relevance to it, but I felt like we had to comment on it because it's gone semi viral. The reality is, and Just real quick, the reality is that we've commented on Chinese socialism, the reform and opening up, a million times. We've published books on it. We have sections of our books that are dealing with it systematically. From my work, from the work of Carlos Martinez, we've published John Ross, we've published a host of other people who have worked in this area and show very clearly the continuation of Mao and Deng and reform and opening up and Xi and all these different things and the success of the Chinese Revolution. So engage with that and don't get down by these videos. And if you're a Maoist, I mean, come on.
Yeah, our ruling class has a long history of using ultra leftism against communism. I mean, like even going back to the original Trots, right? And Nazi collaboration with Trotsky himself, and after that, the Maoists, and there's a very long history of this. You got to remember that when it comes down to the real world and real politic, things are not still like ingrained in these aesthetics, right? Of they're the communists, they're the capitalists. They're ingrained in the real politics happening, right? What forces need to overcome what other forces, right? Who's going to win out here and there, etc. And this is just a very good example that back in the day, and I'll say this about, and this can be like sort of the last thing on it, I guess, because it sounded like you were done, that back in the day, China was not strong enough to even have protests. Remember what they came out of, the warlord era, the civil war, right? No revolution allows protests while it's, in jeopardy. No communist revolution has, no bourgeois revolution has. I say this all the time. The Sons of Liberty were literally tarring and feathering loyalists. Random people who had done nothing other than support the British Empire against the revolution. They were covering them in boiling hot tar and throwing feathers at them, burning them alive, torturing them, right? And then leaving the bodies in public square as a warning to anyone who would stand against the revolution. And it's always, that's just what it is, I think that's a really good place to end for the night too. To tell you the truth, I think we had the segment planned. We were going to talk about the U.S., but for me, that seems as if it's got its own topic and show and everything. We could talk about the conditions of the U.S. and where we are and Trump and everything else in its own hour thing. We've already been going for 2 hours now. I don't know. What do you think, brother?
No, I totally agree. My energy is dwindling as we enter the 2 hours. That hiatus took away some of my capacity to go on for 3 and 4 hours as I was before. So we'll build up to it.
You got tired after those crackers. That's what it is.
Yeah. Well, I was tired before the crackers as well. But yes, we'll be doing another.
Right.
We'll be doing another one of these tomorrow.
I apologize. Go ahead.
We'll be doing another one of these tomorrow. We'll hit on some of the situations that we are seeing in the U.S. Going into the new year, which is going to be a interesting year as we have the 2024 elections. So thank you immensely to all of those who were able to watch, to those who were able to donate. Thank you, Leticia. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Battle Cossack twice. Thank you, Popsatch. And thank you, Sean Moon. Thank you to all of you who were able to donate and those who were able to watch. Remember that our ideas navigate in ideological fields controlled by the bourgeoisie, where shadow banning of dissenting ideas, actually dissenting ideas, is at the order of the day, and the only way to combat that is by real people sharing with their friends, families, and coworkers content. So, if you think the ideas that we uphold, defend, argue for, explain are important, please do consider sharing them on your social media, sharing them with friends. And if you'd like to financially fund this People's Institute, consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. So thank you to all of you who came, who watched, who donated, who will watch in the post live recording, and we'll see you next time.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.